Welcome to the Early Edge NFL Player Prop Show, brought to you by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. It is time for Week 5, but before we get into it, let's look back on Week 4 and take a look at this recap screen. Proppy 4-2, Uncle Dave 3-2. Unfortunately, I brought us down 2-3. Proppy will talk about some changes that we have going forward, but let me give some overall records. Proppy 13-10. Uncle Dave, after an 0-4 start, he's 10-5 since then, so 10-9 overall, and I am 9-9. We're tracking it. We want you guys to be profitable just like us. So let us bring in the stars of the show. We have the best prop bettor, as I like to say, on the planet. Lines move when he makes picks, and if you are a SportsLine subscriber, you need to sign up for Propstarz notifications on the app, because if you do, you will get the picks as soon as he posts them. So that's Propstarz. Then we have, from the award-winning Fantasy Football Today podcast, it is Uncle Dave, Dave Richard from CBS Sports. Congratulations, Uncle Dave. You are an award winner. I'm sure multiple awards, but congrats on this one.
It's just the results of hard work and being dedicated to your audience. And that's something that I think we have been for the past 4 years now. So let's keep it going. Week 5 should be fun. Thursday's game was fun. I think they keep it going in the NFL. I say we keep it going with our picks.
Proppy, I want you to tell us about some units. Now, when we get to this point of the season, how do you decide which thank you, Dave. How do you decide the number of units that you go on a certain play? What's your rationale there?
Great to see you first and foremost, EC. Uncle Dave as well. I do want to mention that in addition to being an award-winning, Dave is also a Hall of Famer. So we refer to him as Hall of Famer Uncle Dave Richard. So tip of the cap to Dave there. And yeah, I wanted to touch on a couple of things. First and foremost, we're going to be tracking our season-long results moving forward. The way we're going to do that is we're going to assign units to our play. Our plays, generally speaking, 1 unit represents 1 or 2% of your bankroll, depending on how aggressive of a bettor you want to be. This is something I'll discuss more as we progress with the season, though. You will also see me take some 1.5 and 2 unit plays rarely. That is an indicator that I have a tremendous amount of confidence in the play. If I'm going at 1.5 or 2 units on a play, I have more confidence than I do on a standard play. But we all want to track our season-long results. We're going to show you sort of how we manage our bankrolls and how to use a unit system, which is really the optimal way if you're serious about being a full-time bettor.
All right. Well, as we heard that, I guess it's time to get right into the plays. Uncle Dave, or actually, probably we're going to start with you on this one. You and Uncle Dave have some synergy here. And we're going to start in Cincinnati with the running back situation. Where are you going with Chase Brown?
Yeah, I'm fading Chase Brown, something we did earlier in the season, I believe, in week 1 successfully. Chase Brown, Dave and I both like fading this backfield without giving away Dave's pick here, but it's a really difficult matchup against a Baltimore defense that's been a significant pass funnel, but they've been absolutely brutal on opposing running backs. Through 4 weeks this season, they have surrendered 170 yards to opposing running backs. That is 100 yards less than Pittsburgh, who is first in EPA allowed per rush. They've given up 270 yards. They're the 4th stingiest defense. Just to put into perspective how stingy how good this Baltimore run defense has been. 42.5 yards per game to opposing running backs. So Chase Brown, who I'm extremely bullish on as far as his long-term outlook, I think he's going to eventually become a feature back. I think Cincinnati would benefit really from giving him 65 or 70% of those backfield touches. This is just a difficult matchup. He's still in a timeshare with Zach Moss, who's going to handle early down work. Chase Brown has only had double-digit carries 1 time this season. I think it's unlikely he does here. I just do not look at this as a matchup where Cincinnati is going to look to really establish the run. Again, when you play Baltimore, they're a pass funnel because the run defense is so good and the secondary has really, really struggled. So teams are opting to go with a pass-heavy approach against Baltimore here. So I love fading Chase Brown here. It's a low number at only 31.5 yards. But again, in a timeshare with Zach Moss, brutal matchup here. He's been highly efficient. He's averaging 6.3 yards per carry thus far, but I don't think that's sustainable for as good as he is. He's an exceptional receiver as well. I expect him to his role to be more, third downs. In this particular matchup, I'd be surprised if he eclipses 8 carries. So I am fading Chase Brown, who, again, bullish on long term. This is just a stay away, or really a matchup I think worth fading under 31.5 rushing yards versus Baltimore.
All right, so Uncle Dave, Proppy is, as he gave out some great reasons for why to fade Chase Brown, but that means Zach Moss should go over or not.
Yeah, I see it a little bit differently than Properoo. I think that Zach Moss is the running back that you should fade. Frankly, both of them. Proppy laid it out. Let me give the prop first. Zach Moss under 41.5 rushing yards. I've seen it as low as -111. And I think that's a pretty good price considering the juice on most of these props. Saying it a different way, the Ravens allow just 2.7 yards per carry to running backs on the season. James Cook didn't even have 40 yards. The great James Cook, who throttled Miami back in week 3, I believe. Or it was week 2. Sorry. It's been a long season. I think that Zach Moss isn't going to do well on the carries he gets. But there's something Proppy said that I'm going to disagree with. He sees Chase Brown as the third down back, the passing downs back, not Zach Moss. Let me tell you what these Bengals did with their running backs last week. Favorable matchup. They went up against Carolina. It's their second straight week with a favorable matchup. And Chase Brown and Zach Moss split the rushing downs work. And if you watched the game, you would have seen that Chase Brown, Proppy's right about this one, Chase Brown was the more effective running back of the two. So I think there is a changing of the guard here, but I think it's going to be on running downs where we will see a little bit more of Chase Brown and a little bit less of Zach Moss. Zach Moss is okay. Chase Brown is better. Where I think Zach Moss comes into play is on the passing downs. And we saw him do much more of that last week. And we've really seen him do a lot of it all season long compared to Chase Brown. I think they trust him more in pass protection. He's their running back in the 2-minute offense. And so I think that it's a real opportunity for Zach Moss to continue to play for Cincinnati, but not necessarily get a lot of carries for Cincinnati. And so I'm buying into the Ravens run defense, and I'm buying into Chase Brown getting a little bit more work. And I'm really buying into one other thing, which is Joe Burrow throwing the football and doing a lot with it against the secondary in Baltimore that has been bad. I do get the sense that they are improving. They got rookie Nate Wiggins going last week. I think he's going to continue to play well. It makes me a little bit nervous to try any of Cincinnati's passing props, but the one passing prop that I do like is Zach Moss over 14.5 receiving yards. But this isn't it. It's the rushing prop that we're taking the under. And here's the last thing. Moss has over 50 yards in each of his last 2 games. I mentioned who they were against. It's the Commanders and the Panthers. Easy run funnel defenses. I think it's a sucker bet. I think this line was designed to make people think, oh, Zach Moss has already hit 50 yards each of his last 2 games. Let's take another over. I know it's Baltimore, but why not? Don't do it. Don't fall for it. Take the under. Zach Moss, 41.5 rushing yards.
And that's why it pays to watch live and it pays to listen to Uncle Dave, because he also gave out a bonus prop that he would sprinkle as well on the other side of Zach Moss. So very good, a little sprinkle. I had to get that reference in there. Now, Uncle Dave, one of your favorites that we talked about earlier in the season is James Cook from the elevator ride that you had with him in the offseason. Yes. And Proppy, I love getting a text from Proppy during the middle of the week where he's like, all right, I got this prop. You got to check it out on the site. And who does it happen to involve this week? James Cook. Go ahead, Proppy. Tell us what.
The man with the elevator physique, James Cook, I might add, who has been spectacular this season. I am backing James Cook. I think he's going to take multiple elevator rides this week against the Houston Texans here. I'm going over 57 or 58.5 rushing yards for James Cook, who I love in this matchup. So I think James Cook, if we look at the numbers thus far, he's been efficient from a red zone perspective. He's cashed in a lot of touchdowns, which was thought to be, a big knock on him as far as the fantasy was concerned. Hasn't gotten a lot of opportunities, though. The volume hasn't really been there for James Cook. I think that's due in large part, if we look at Buffalo, they've really been in very few competitive football games. They've either blown out their opponents or they've been blown out last week. So we really haven't seen them in a neutral game script. I think when we do finally see Buffalo in a neutral game script, we're going to see James Cook get more work. And I think we're going to see that very likely this week against Houston, who's obviously a good team and I think is going to be competitive against Buffalo, who I think bounces back after getting throttled last week versus Baltimore. If we look at how to attack this Houston team, it is certainly on the ground. They are very vulnerable as far as their rush defense is concerned. So I expect a competitive game environment, and I expect a healthy dose of James Cook in the process. I think he's going to be heavily utilized in the 20s as well. No Khalil Shakir, EC, someone that you and I have discussed at length over the course of this week. He is out. I think that puts an even bigger onus on James Cook and this rushing attack. So I think we see a lot of James Cook against Houston. One thing that is encouraging, we haven't seen that much Ray Davis when he has been on the field, haven't been overly impressed. So this is James Cook's backfield. I look at this as a spot where he's very likely to exceed 15 rushing attempts, and it's certainly a great matchup against Houston. And I finally think we see Buffalo in a competitive game environment, so we get a real feel for what kind of offense, because we really don't know. We haven't seen them very much in a neutral game environment. Look at Josh Allen's numbers so far. He really doesn't have a lot of passing volume, again, because Buffalo has yet to be in a really competitive four-quarter game. So I love James Cook. We're getting a discount because he struggled last week, as Dave mentioned, against Baltimore, who has just shut down every running back they've faced. So give me James Cook over 57.5 rushing yards. I expect him to ride that elevator all the way to the top and all the way to the cashier.
All right, so Prop, got to ask you, we have a couple in the chat. Drew and Eric want to know about Dalton Kincaid. You were on his prop last week. That hit on Sunday Night Football. Over 39.5 this week. Are you playing over or under?
It's interesting. Definitely not playing under on Dalton Kincaid because I do think he sees an uptick in usage and targets and routes run. Again, we mentioned no Khalil Shakir, who's been the leading receiver, been incredibly efficient for Buffalo. But however, while I did initially, when I saw the news that Shakir was out, I did think that Kincaid would be the biggest beneficiary. Then I remembered that this Houston defense, they have allowed something like 30 or 40 yards to opposing tight ends this season. So it's interesting. We've seen Kincaid, who was 45.5 when the news broke regarding Shakir. His number has dropped, actually. It's down to the low 40s. And I think that has to do with the Houston Texans' pass defense and specifically their ability to cover opposing tight ends. So while I do think he sees an uptick in usage, I'm hesitant just due to the matchup.
Uncle Dave, what's your thoughts on Buffalo this week? Proppy talked about him extensively. We saw them really struggle against Baltimore last week. Are you expecting a bounce back for Josh Allen, Dalton Kincaid, James Cook, anyone else that we should just have on the radar?
Cook makes sense, especially as someone who could get some of those short area targets that Khalil Shakir is going to leave behind. And another reason to be a little bit nervous about Dalton Kincaid is because safety Jimmy Ward for the Texans isn't even on the injury report. He started the week limited with a groin injury. He practiced in full by Friday. He is not on the injury report. That's usually the guy that covers tight ends in obvious passing situations, and that makes for a difficult matchup for Dalton Kincaid. Keep your eye on Curtis Samuel, who seems like the more natural replacement in the slot for Khalil Shakir. I know that a lot of fantasy analysts were big into Curtis Samuel before the season. I like his versatility. I wasn't sure just how effective he'd be, and he began the year with an injury, so a lot of people kind of jumped off that bandwagon to begin the season, but now it seems like he's healthy. I don't think he's played a ton of snaps from week to week. He's going to be needed by Buffalo this week. I have no clue what his player props are, but anything north of 20 yards is what I would take the over on, because I think he's going to see more catches and be more involved with Khalil Shakir out.
All right, Dave, I want to talk about a player that we discussed last week. Chuba Hubbard. I'm playing his over 60.5 rushing yards at -115. So against the Bears, normally you'd think their defense, it's stingy. But against running backs, not so much. Tony Pollard had 82 on the ground. Jonathan Taylor, 110. Kyron Williams last week, 94. The key is all three of those guys had 16 or more carries, because the Bears are surrendering 4.6 yards per carry to running backs. So it comes down to volume here. Chuba Hubbard is over this number in 3 of 4 games this year, including all 3 straight games, and he's seen 21 and 18 carries in his last 2 games. Dave, where do you stand with my pick on Chuba? First, yeah.
Well, you mentioned the names. Say them again. Give the 3 names of the running backs that did well against Chicago. You said them already.
Tony Pollard, Jonathan Taylor, Kyron Williams.
And so the first thought that came to my mind is, well, is Chuba Hubbard worthy of being in the same conversation as those guys, particularly Kyron Williams and Jonathan Taylor? And my answer to that question is an emphatic yes. We know that on his last 3 games, he's averaged over 5.4 yards per carry in each of them. And EC, you mentioned just how much work he's getting, 18 carries in each of his last 2 games. I believe it's 14 plus touches in each of his last 3. And I don't know if he's necessarily auditioning to keep the rushing downs roll on lock for Carolina, but we know that Jonathan Brooks is coming off the PUP list soon, and he's going to be able to come in and be a factor for the Carolina Panthers run game. And that's going to take work away from Chuba Hubbard. I would say that Chuba is probably going to get all that he can handle. I might like the combo line better, though, because if Chicago does manage to build a lead, Carolina tends to get into these games where they're at best competitive, at worst getting blown out. You'd want to have that factor, the ability of him catching passes, helping him out. And Miles Sanders, this is worth mentioning. I don't know how big of a deal it'll be, but he missed time in practice this week with an illness. I will double check his status on Carolina's injury report. But anybody who misses even a little bit of time could miss out on a few snaps here and there in a game. So Chuba Hubbard's a pretty good pick. I like it.
I feel good about it. Well, thank you. Proppy, what do you have to say on it?
Miles Sanders has been absolutely atrocious as well. So I'm glad Dave brought up the fact that Chuba Hubbard may have the little extra incentive with Jonathan Brooks set to potentially return from the PUP list or be activated to or elevated to the roster here. Certainly Chuba Hubbard has played very good football, so I'm glad Dave brought that up. One thing I did want to mention, just a little bit off track here, is I don't know how much of our audience knows this, but I've been listening to Dave long before I've worked with Dave, and it's been such a treat for me because I had been listening to Dave for over 10 years. I've been a fan of Fantasy Football Today, listening to Dave's podcast. So now to have access to Dave and be able to ask him fantasy questions is such a special privilege that I certainly do not take for granted. But one thing I did want to ask Dave very quickly, Dave, do you view Khalil Shakir as a quote-unquote throwaway piece? Because I'll explain why after your answer, Dave.
I don't think he carries a ton of value in fantasy, but I think it depends on the league. If it's a league that can start 3 receivers, then he's pretty close to every week starter in fantasy. Sure.
Fair enough. EC and I were discussing trades, and one of the trades happened to involve Khalil Shakir, and EC referred to him as a throwaway piece.
Well, that's part of the course, Proppy, because he threw away Aaron Jones in a trade 2 weeks ago.
I deserve that. Hey, in the chat, if you're watching with us live, our guy Sia Najad, host of the Early Edge, is in the chat for a few more minutes. Make sure to ask him some questions as you hear Proppy discuss his next prop. And he's going to my Green Bay Packers here. And I'm so proud, Proppy. I love this prop. This is my favorite of yours on the board this week. Josh Jacobs against the run funnel Los Angeles Rams. Where are you going?
This is my favorite prop as well on the week here, EC, and that's Josh Jacobs over 59.5 rushing yards. Pump your brakes. That's the number I got out on the site to our subscribers. I know it's 63 or 64 and a half. Still very comfortable with it at that number. I want to first admit that I was a Josh Jacobs hater coming into the offseason. EC, you can attest to that. I thought Green Bay gave him a big deal and so much tread on Josh Jacobs' tires coming into the year, had such heavy workloads as a Raider. I just didn't think it was money well spent, but Josh Jacobs is playing very good football. The efficiency metrics, he's improved significantly compared to last season, averaging 26 breakaway yards per game. His rush success has been very good as well. And this is a fantastic matchup against the Rams team, 29th in EPA allowed per rush. So this is I think we're going to see a big, heavy workload from Josh Jacobs here. We've seen opposing running backs just absolutely torch this Rams defense. So we know that the Packers offense will be without Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs as well, looking unlikely to play. So I think they're going to see Green Bay rely heavily on the backfield here. And I think Josh Jacobs is going to get plenty of work in what is a fantastic matchup. And again, he has played very well. Love this spot for him. I do want to point out there is a pass catcher on Green Bay, Dontayvion Wicks, who I love this week as well. I actually, shortly before this stream started, I am currently at a casino with a sports book. I went and put a pretty significant bet on Dontayvion Wicks' alt line to go over 90 receiving yards. So that is a spot that I almost gave out as an official pick. Definitely wanted to highlight how much I love the spot. Loved seeing the usage. He's getting targeted in the splash zone. I always talk about how those are the most valuable targets in an NFL offense. Lo and behold, this Rams team does not defend the splash zone well whatsoever. And again, he's going to see a bump in usage and targets and run more routes. Very likely hasn't even been a full-time player in this Green Bay offense. And I think he's the biggest beneficiary with Christian Watson out, who runs a lot of routes downfield. I think we see Dontayvion Wicks assume that role, and he has drawn a lot of targets when he does run routes. So there is a lot to like with this young, explosive, dynamic player, and it's a fantastic matchup for him. So yes, I like his over on his receiving yards, but I love his alt lines to go over triple digits potentially.
Wow, Dave.
I was going to give Josh Jacobs over 64.5 rush yards, and then I saw that the star of Propstarz already had Jacobs on his list, and so I backed off. That's why I only have 4 props this week. I just want to give a couple of other notes that I have on Jacobs that I think will make you feel really good about taking him no matter what number you find him at. 2 weeks ago, the Packers started to take work away from Jacobs. He had 48 carries in their first 2 games. So in the 2 games after, just 23 carries and only for 94 yards. You mentioned the efficiency prop. I think that last week we saw a difference in efficiency for Jacobs. He did a better job than Emmanuel Wilson. When you look in the box score, people just kind of focus on how many carries they got. It was a blowout. The Packers were trailing by 3 scores in the second quarter. These guys weren't going to get a lot of carries, but Jacobs still played over 60% of the snaps, and he had the better day rushing-wise. I think they can tilt back in the other direction now, and that's why I really think Jacobs has a shot to have a really good game, one of my favorite fantasy running backs this week. And then here's the cherry on top. The lead back for every team that's played the Rams this year has had at least 77 rushing yards. So I think that there's a very good chance that Jacobs could exceed that. This is one of my favorite props of the week as well. I'm glad that we're all on it, whether it's 59.5, 64.5, 69.5. Doesn't matter where you find it. Jacobs should have a real good week for the Packers.
I'm guessing this is a 2-unit play for you, Proppy, correct?
It is, and it is on the site as well. So if you're a SportsLine subscriber, I got this play out last night. It was the first prop that the second prop after James Cook that I posted. As soon as the line dropped, this is when I jumped on. I bet it myself immediately as well in person here, and I absolutely love it. It's my favorite prop of the week so far.
Let me say this as well. Mike, who's in the chat, hit me up on Twitter last week or X and said, hey, I want to get back on SportsLine. Send me a promo code. I did. He's back on, and he's getting your notifications. If anyone else, if you're in the chat, if you're listening and you are not a SportsLine member, send me a DM on X at Cohen's Corner AZ. You can see it on the screen here. If you're watching on YouTube, send me a note and I will get you the best deal that we have available, like I did Mike. So we'll roll with it from there. All right, Proppy, you got one more for us. It is an underline. This is a Proppy special, unders, and it's a later game on Sunday. Tell us about it.
Yes, are we talking about Rico Dowdle, EC?
We are.
We are indeed. So, yeah, I'm going under 41.5 rushing yards for Rico Dowdle, who finds himself as, I guess, the feature back for the Dallas Cowboys, facing the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh first in EPA allowed per rush, the number one rush defense in the NFL. They've given up 277 yards so far, just around 65 yards per game to opposing running backs this year. We've seen Dallas really struggle to run the football, whether it's Dowdle in the backfield or Ezekiel Elliott. It appears Dowdle does have the role as the featured runner, whatever that really means. It doesn't look like it's obviously going to be a high volume role. Dowdle's only had double-digit carries one time. He's averaging under 4 yards per carry, so he hasn't been very effective this season. We've also seen Dalvin Cook get elevated. It looks like a matter of time until we see another committee approach with Dalvin Cook involved in this Dallas backfield. It remains to be seen if he's going to be activated for this game against Pittsburgh. Even if he is, or I guess, if he isn't activated for this game, very comfortable with this number in this matchup. And if he is elevated, which it does appear that there is at least somewhat of a chance, this number for Dowdle should go down to maybe between 33.5 and 29. So I'm keeping on this early. Speculative. I think either way, he has a great shot at staying under against this Pittsburgh run defense, which has been very formidable so far.
A lot of running back props this week. We haven't had as many as in previous weeks, but this week, Proppy and Uncle Dave are all over it. Now, where can you place these bets? Go to BetMGM, and they have a great deal with their first touchdown promotion. We've all had our first touchdown bet called back before. Been there, done that. And BetMGM is giving you a second chance. With BetMGM's Pro Football Second Chance, place any first touchdown scorer bet. If your player doesn't score first but scores second, you get your entire stake back in cash. No opt-in required. Here's how it works. Place a pregame straight first touchdown scorer bet in any NFL game. If your player scores the first touchdown in the game, win your wager as normal. If your player scores the second touchdown in the game, you'll get your stake back in cash. It's that simple. Log into BetMGM for more details. Coming up next, we will talk receiver props after we hear from one of our sponsors.
CBS Sports HQ, giving you college football coverage unlike anyone else.
We're talking Big Ten.
Pre- and post-game coverage.
Are you encouraged with the way that this team responded?
Along with breaking news.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
Highlights and expert analysis.
That streak could be in jeopardy here.
Sure. What was your main takeaway from this game? How impressive was his domination?
That really changed the football game.
Let's go ahead and have some more fun.
Another wild ending.
The chaos continues.
Turn to CBS Sports HQ.
Uncle Dave, when we did NFL draft shows in the spring, Proppy was very big on one receiver coming out of the draft. Actually, a couple of receivers, both from LSU. He got Malik Neighbors, he nailed that one. But Brian Thomas Jr. is a Proppy special. And this week, he's an Uncle Dave special.
I love what I've seen from Brian Thomas Jr. all season long, but really the last 2 weeks especially has encouraged me that he is the best receiver in Jacksonville. So we're going to take the over on his total yardage, rushing and receiving at 55.5. That's at minus 119. Because why take the over on just receiving when it's a yard less with more juice? I can't answer that. I like the total and I like the juice being lower. So let's go with that. He's been their best downfield receiver, seeing 9 targets in each of their past 2 games. That proves it. Doug Peterson, he's the coach for now in Jacksonville. He said this week that, quote, we're going to continue to keep throwing the ball his way. The Colts pass defense, that's who they're playing this week at home. It's been abysmal, man. Overall, they've led up a third most 70% completion rate to wide receivers and 12.8 yards per catch. Now, the throws of 10-plus air yards against Indianapolis, That's something where it's been completely different, and it's outrageous how bad Indianapolis is. 26.7 yards per catch on throws of 10-plus air yards, the fourth highest number of any team in the league. So that got me thinking, what's the average depth of target for Brian Thomas Jr.? Well, in his past 2 games, when he's been getting at least 9 targets per game, it's 11.3. That's more than 10 yards downfield. On the season, it's 12.46 yards. That's longer than 10 yards downfield. You see what I'm saying? So the throws that he's getting, he's going to be able to put up more yards on. And that's what we're looking for, obviously, is yardage. And here's the best part about it. Last week, he got his first carry. It went for 13 yards. He gives us another one of these. He doesn't even have to get as many yards. But I think he's going to get a lot of yards either way. If you wanted to, and this is just, let's call it a friendly suggestion. You can take the over on this total yardage prop, and then you could ladder his receiving yards. I think you could ladder it all the way to 90-plus and feel pretty good about how he'll stand after the Jaguars beat the Colts in week number 5.
All right, so I agree with the Jaguars beating the Colts. Great pick. And Proppy's going to talk about Trevor Lawrence later on. But Eric makes a good point in the chat, Uncle Dave, in that precipitation, there's an 80% chance of it in Jacksonville on Sunday. Does that concern you at all for passing props?
Well, obviously that would be something that would be problematic, but I'm always of the belief, and this is why getting in front of props early, I like to hear about them. I don't necessarily like to put my whole stake on them when I hear about them, because if the weather is bad, then obviously this isn't as exciting of a bet. But I also know that weather forecasts are not exactly the most reliable thing. And yes, I get the irony of a fantasy football analyst saying that reports are not necessarily accurate. And so there have been times where there's been no weather report and everything looks fine. And then the weather turns to crap when the kickoff comes. And then there's other times where there's rain in the forecast and then everything's fine, or it's not that bad of a downpour. And so really what I would struggle with is if it's a heavy downpour in Jacksonville on Sunday. And if that's the case, that'll muck up the whole game for both the Jaguars and the Colts. If it's a regular rainstorm or if it's even just a light rain, man, this doesn't bother me one bit.
Fair enough. Now, Proppy, we know. Go ahead. You have something to say about that. Go ahead.
Too early for weather to really be a big factor as far as your handicapping process is concerned. As Dave mentioned, it's extremely fluid. We could easily be looking at, sunshine and perfect weather come game time. I would also offer that as far as rain specifically is concerned, really not that big of a deterrent. It's wind. It's wind that you really want to be cautious with. That impacts downfield passing. Rain really has minimal impact. Football players are very comfortable playing in the rain, and the same advantages or disadvantages as far as footing, slipping are relevant for the defenders as well. So you really don't see, unless Dave mentioned like extremely heavy rain, have much of an impact on a football game.
Dave.
I'm double checking the weather forecast. This is from the Weather Channel. Jacksonville on Sunday. Let me see. Rain is in the forecast during the day, then remaining cloudy with showers in the afternoon. 79% chance of rain, low wind. I don't think that this is the type of forecast that would scare me off of taking a Brian Jr. player prop.
It's Florida. It rains all the time. I mean, Miami, Jacksonville, Tampa, we know the drill. No mud bowl is what we're thinking, is what basically.
No mud bowl.
Proppy, you have an affinity for LSU receivers, as we've discussed. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., and the next player you're going to give out, Jamar Chase.
Jamar Chase. And real quick, I do want to mention I had Brian Thomas Jr. over Marvin Harrison Jr. In the pre-draft process, and I stand by that. I think Brian Thomas Jr. ends up a better NFL wide receiver. But yeah, we're talking Jamar Chase, another LSU wide receiver who Malik Neighbors reminds me a lot of. I'm going over 71.5 receiving yards for Jamar Chase this week against that Baltimore defense who Dave and I talked about. They're a significant pass funnel They're allowing more explosive downfield passing plays than any pass defense in the NFL this season. So if Joe Burrow has protection and he stays upright in this matchup, he's going to hook up with Jamar Chase and probably T. Higgins downfield. So I love this spot for Jamar Chase. Here's another Jamar Chase that's going to blow a stat that's going to blow your guys' mind. He has yet to eclipse 7 targets in a game this season. That is inexplicable to me when you have a wide receiver the caliber of Jamar Chase, who's been double teamed more than any wide receiver in the NFL since entering the league, has the highest double team rate this season as well. Another thing that's nice about this Baltimore pass defense, in addition to being a pass funnel, in addition to not protecting the splash zone, they do not double team very often either. So this really appears to be an advantageous matchup for Jamar Chase. Love that T. Higgins is back in the fold as well to take some pressure off. I'm waiting for them to unleash Jermaine Burton a bit, because I do believe that his when he's lined up outside, that's going to also take some attention away from Jamar Chase there. But yeah, I just look at this matchup for Jamar Chase. I think this is a spot where we could see Cincinnati push into a high-volume environment. I do not think you're going to be able to successfully run the football. That's why Dave and I are fading the Cincinnati backfield. I think we're going to see Cincinnati air the ball out quite a bit in this matchup. I think Jamar Chase ends up with double-digit targets for the first time this season. I think 71.5 yards is way too low. I expected this line to be 81.5. So this is one of my other favorite props of the week. I do anticipate this one closing, maybe not at 80, but at least at 74 to 76.5 here. Love Jamar Chase in this matchup.
Hey, Proppy, you had mentioned this a few times, and somebody asked about this in the chat. What is the splash zone?
The splash zone is deep down the field, but the middle of the field. So it's very difficult to complete passes on the boundaries. Those have the lowest completion percentage down the field. The splash zone is where you're targeting downfield, but downfield in the middle of the field. So they're really the most valuable targets if you break down a chart of all the potential areas of the football field. So we want to find wide receivers that are being heavily targeted in that area, because they have a higher chance of being completed than if they're being targeted downfield on the boundary or the perimeter.
Have you done any research to suggest that shorter throws in the middle of the field are also more valuable
in comparison to
the throws to the sideline?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So just anything that's obviously you want those bigger plays, because the bigger plays get more
in the middle of the field with a higher completion percentage.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Good. That's interesting.
All right, Uncle Dave, let's talk about a player who lines up on the perimeter. We don't see him go over the middle of the field as often, but every now and then he's in the slot, he's on the outside. It's Deontay Johnson against the Chicago Bears. What do you expect this week?
I expect more targets and more catches, which is why I'm taking Deontay Johnson over 5.5 receptions at plus 120. BetMGM, you're kind to me. And so now I'm kind of thinking, well, is this a sucker bet? What's going on here? Because this is a dude that's had at least 13 targets in each of his last 2 games. Those are games with Andy Dalton. He's had 7 catches in each of those games with Dalton. So it can't be that. It can't be volume. Maybe it's the weather. So I checked the weather before we came on the air. And yeah, it's supposed to be a little windy in Chicago. Could be 15-mile-an-hour winds. And Proppy talked about how that's an important factor. It would need to be stronger wind than that to make me nervous about Deontay Johnson. But even then, it's not like Deontay Johnson is exclusive to the splash zone. I guess that's the theme of today's show. 15 catches he's had from Dalton over the past 2 weeks. 10 of the 15 have been caught inside of 10 yards from the line of scrimmage. And I don't care about the yardage. I don't care about the touchdowns. I just want the catches. And the one thing that I don't think will happen, cover your ears, EC, I don't think Carolina is going to play with a huge lead in this game. And so that means that we're going to see the Panthers competitive, and that's not a bad thing, or trailing, which could be kind of a bad thing for Chuba Hubbard, but don't quote me on that. But it's going to be a great thing for Deontay Johnson. Let me give you the flashback to back in training camp when Dave Canales said he wants the offense to flow through Deontay Johnson and that he's going to be the first read early and often. This is a tough defense, no doubt about it. The secondary for Chicago is especially tough. But in 2 of their last 3 games, the leading target getter has had at least 6 catches. That's all we're looking for from Deontay Johnson this week. I think he'll get it, and it's plus odds to boot. Deontay Johnson over 5.5 receptions, plus 120.
I'm facing him in multiple leagues. Not good to hear that, Uncle Dave. Sorry about that. Or sorry for me about that. All right, I got one for you. This is a 2-for-1 prop. DK Metcalf over 63.5 yards at minus 115 and to score an anytime touchdown at plus 140. The Giants are not good against number 1 receivers. Now, they've given up a touchdown to 3 of the 4 number 1 receivers they faced, Justin Jefferson, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb. Now, they haven't given up a huge, receiving line game, but 63.5 isn't asking much, especially from a guy that's topped 100 yards in 3 straight games. Either I just got sucked into a trap line or I'm going to hit this one easily. DK Metcalf over 63.5 and to score a touchdown. Dave, any thoughts? You have him ranked fairly high in your rankings this week.
He's a monster. He's absolutely capable of hitting this on 1 or 2 catches, much less 4 or 5 catches. I do have a prop that's kind of conflicting for the yardage, though. So we can discuss it later, but I definitely like the anytime touchdown one.
Okay. And that's what I hit when I gave out this with Marvin Harrison last week. He scored the anytime touchdown and the yards. Well, I don't want to talk about that. All right. It is time for passing props. Let's get Proppy to talk about, we talked about Brian Thomas Jr. It's time for Trevor Lawrence. Proppy, you're giving out a Trevor Lawrence prop? What's going on here?
I am. I'm going over Trevor Lawrence, 234.5 passing yards. It's been a tough season for Trevor Lawrence, much maligned thus far. But if we look at his passing profile, really the biggest issue has been downfield accuracy. If he had connected on basically a handful of deep throws, we'd be talking about Trevor Lawrence having a much better season than he has. So if there was ever a matchup that's a soft matchup for him, a get-right spot, as we like to call them, against a team that struggles in coverage, that doesn't generate consistent pressure, that, my friends, would be the Indianapolis Colts pass defense or their defense. So this is a fantastic spot for Trevor Lawrence. As Dave mentioned, when he's going with Brian Thomas Jr. here. I love this spot for Jacksonville at home to really pick apart this Indianapolis secondary. I think we see Trevor Lawrence really connect on some downfield passing. He's got the full complement of weapons potentially Evan Ingram returning to the lineup. Obviously, that boosted a little bit, but it's fine if he doesn't play. He's got Brian Thomas Jr. He's got Christian Kirk. He's got Gabe Davis. So, yeah, if Evan Ingram comes back, it's more the merrier there for Trevor Lawrence. But I just look at this as a spot where we're going to see Jacksonville be aggressive through the air. Indianapolis's run defense have actually been fairly serviceable. They just have not been able to generate a pass rush whatsoever, and they've been dismal in coverage. So this really sets up nicely for Trevor Lawrence, who we're getting a significant discount on because he's struggled thus far. But I think the struggles are a bit of an overreaction. Love his chances of getting back on track here. I think we see Jacksonville come out aggressively, really test that back end. I think Brian Thomas Jr. has a big day, and I think Trevor Lawrence does as well.
All right, so we had a question earlier in the show. I'm sorry if I get your name wrong. It's Hika. I apologize in advance. Big fan of the show. He says, how about Trevor Lawrence over 1.5 touchdowns proppy at even money?
I like that as well. I will admittedly tell you that this specific category is volatile, and it's difficult to really handicap, in my opinion, as far as like finding significant edges. Really, you're just looking for price points that are favorable here, which I think this is. So I do think it's a solid spot. I'm more comfortable playing the yards here, but I do like this prop as well.
Fair enough. All right. Now let me give a quick one out here passing prop. This one, I apologize for the juice here. Minus 139, but Brock Purdy over 1.5 touchdowns against the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, this feels like thievery. In 3 Purdy starts against Arizona, San Francisco scored 38, 35, and 45 points. Expect another huge outing this week if that trend continues. Purdy in those starts has thrown for a combined 8 touchdowns. And this is a guy who ranks first in yards in the NFL, passing yards, first in yards per attempt, and first in 20-plus yard completions with 18. He's going to torch this Arizona defense. Uncle Dave, are you with me here that we're going to get a Brock Purdy breakout? Well, somewhat of a breakout because he's putting up dry yards, I feel like, no?
I think the only thing you really have to worry about are defensive pass interference penalties that set up the 49ers first and goal at the 1. Short of that, though, I think we can absolutely expect at least 2 touchdowns from Propstarz. And doesn't work as well with Brock.
I will say this, Brock Purdy also from Arizona. He's going up against his hometown team. I do like that. Hey, Proppy, Jay Kane wants to know, and Mike wants to know on the chat, Trevor Lawrence, his line is already 240.5, 241.5 in some places. What's your read on that?
Play it up to 247.
All right. Pretty simple. All right, Uncle Dave, last passing prop. We talked about DK Metcalf, and you said you had a prop that might go against it. Uh-oh. Do tell.
I want your reaction to this one, EC, so pay close attention. Right. I'm taking the under on Geno Smith's pass attempts, 34.5 at minus 101. Smith's been over this number twice this year and in big ways. There was the close game on the road at New England, no Ken Walker. He had 40-plus attempts. And then there was Monday night at Detroit, 56 passing attempts in that game. That's crazy. So I don't think that this is a good spot, especially 6 days removed from having 56 pass attempts, for him to go and throw a bunch against the Giants. And here's the good news. He won't have to. He's taking on the Giants without Malik Neighbors. Devin Singletary is doubtful. He's not going to play. Their offense is going to be down to nubs. And I don't know how many points are the Giants going to score, especially since the Seahawks defense figures to be a little stronger than what we saw on Monday night. So a lot of those guys that were battling injuries, okay, they didn't play against the Lions. They will be back for some home cooking against the New York Giants. And by the way, home cooking for Geno Smith has meant being under 34.5 pass attempts in each of 2 games this year. I think he takes his foot off the gas a little bit. It doesn't mean he can't throw for big yardage, though. Just not a lot of pass attempts in the game. So it's an under that I'm taking, and it's my favorite prop of the week. 1.5 units. Geno Smith under 34.5 pass attempts against the G-men.
So, Dave, that's interesting. Against Denver in week 1, he had 25. Against Miami, he had 34. So, yes. Ramo asks in the chat, 33.5. What would you do with that number?
If the juice isn't too far out of line, I'd be okay with it, but I'd probably knock it down to no more than 1 unit.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, last prop for you on the show here. Will Lutz over 1.5 field goals. I mean, I wasn't going to go a whole show without giving out a field goal prop here. So only one team has given up multiple successful field goals in every game. Proppy, do you know who it is?
I do not.
It is the Philadelphia Eagles. I've given up multiple. So that's why I asked you. I thought I'd throw that one out there. All right. So what's that?
What a needle.
What can I say? Will Lutz has had 2 or more attempts in every game. He was 1 of 2 last week in that swamp-like conditions in the Meadowlands. Vegas has given up 3 field goals and gave up 3 field goals in each of their first 3 games. And we know Denver's altitude can be a kicker's paradise. That offense is bad, but Will Lutz will get in field goal range. 1 L, as Dave taught me before the show, 1 L, not 2 L's. Will Lutz going to get 2 field goals at minus 125. Proppy, you have anything to say? Any addition there?
I do. I may be aging myself, but I know that both of you can attest to the song Gangster's Paradise by the late, great Coolio, rest in peace. I'm waiting for the end of this season, EC to come out with Kicker's Paradise, his rendition of Gangster's Paradise by the conclusion of the season.
I have the most outrageous, silly, random Coolio story about that song.
Go ahead. We're here.
Time or do we have to go?
We got a few minutes. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes.
In my much younger days, I was a bellhop at a Holiday Inn hotel in Harvey, Illinois. This is not a nice part of Chicagoland, but it is a convenient part of Chicagoland. And many times entertainers would stay there on their way into Chicago or out of Chicago. And on one fateful night, Coolio and his crew stayed at the hotel. I helped them get their stuff to the room. Coolio was definitely on some type of substance that evening, but he was very chill. At one point during the evening, I needed to go into their hotel room to check on something. I walked into the room. No one was there, but music was playing on a stereo in the room. It was the soundtrack to Gangster's Paradise playing, and the song hadn't come out yet. And so months later, when the song did come out, I recognized that music from what I heard from Coolio in the hotel that evening. Later on that summer,
Dave.
Later on that summer, I got fired from the job. The jerk who fired me was named Jack. I hope he's dead now. And the hotel no longer exists in the south side of Chicago.
I'm speechless.
Did you have any idea it would be such a huge hit and part of pop culture and an incredible music video with Michelle Pfeiffer?
I had no idea what it was at the time. The only thing we knew about Coolio was Fantastic Voyage.
That's
and that
right.
was such, it was the fun, upbeat song. It was, safe to play on the radio. And, every kid my age and younger knew that song. And so Coolio comes up with Gangster's Paradise. Man, that's a little bit tougher than Fantastic Voyage.
And if you wonder why we call Uncle Dave a legend, it's stories like that point to it. All right, it will give the recap coming up next after we hear from one of our sponsors.
It's a team almost too good to be true.
You guys ain't ready for us.
Kick your game day off right as the Tops team tackles all the biggest headlines around the league.
Who's got two thumbs and loves this next segment?
Sunday mornings on CBS Sports Network.
Yeah, we have a couple of Roberts in the chat. Robert Frazier says, what a story. Can we make that a new segment? Story time with Uncle Dave. I am all for that. And Robert Page says, legendary Uncle Dave, all in caps. I could not agree more. All right, it is time for the recap screen. Let's go over it. Let's start with Proppy. He's going Trevor Lawrence over 234.5 passing yards, and he said he would play that up to the mid-240s. He also loves James Cook over 57.5 rushing yards. He super loves Josh Jacobs over 59.5 rushing yards. That's a 2-unit play for him. Chase Brown under 32.5 rushing yards. Jamar Chase over 71.5 receiving yards. Rico Dowdle under 41.5 rushing yards. Uncle Dave has Geno Smith under 34.5 passing attempts. 1.5-unit play for him. Zach Moss under 41.5 rushing yards. Brian Thomas Jr. over 55.5 rushing plus receiving yards. Make sure to note that. And Deontay Johnson over 5.5 receptions at plus 120. I'm going Brock Purdy over 1.5 touchdowns. A little juicy at minus 139, but I think the juice is worth the squeeze. Chuba Hubbard over 60.5 rushing yards. DK Metcalf over 63.5 receiving yards. And to score an anytime touchdown at plus 140. And finally, Will Lutz over 1.5 field goals at minus 125. All right, Uncle Dave, your favorite play from Proppy is?
It's obviously the Josh Jacobs prop because I was going to give that one myself, but it would have even been 5 yards higher. And guess what? I still would have given it. I also want to point out one thing. Will Lutz is taking on a Raiders team that's allowed at least 3 field goal attempts to 3 of 4 kickers this year. I think you finally got a good kicker prop this week.
Uncle Dave, every prop I play against the Titans who are on bye this week is a good prop. Jason Sanders hit it again on Monday night. That's like 21 and 24 games. We will keep playing it. We will keep playing it. Yeah. Proppy, your favorite of Uncle Dave's props?
I'm curious what your record on kicker props is this season, EC. I'm also curious when we can expect to hear Kicker's Paradise by MCEC here. But my favorite props are going to be Chuba Hubbard over 60.5 rushing yards. I agree with Dave that he is a very talented running back. I also think the additional incentive of Jonathan Brooks returning to the lineup sooner than later will have Chuba Hubbard potentially running for his job. And then I absolutely love the Brian Thomas Jr. over 55.5 rushing and receiving yards. I also wanted to mention this at the time that I think it's a sharp way to basically have less juice, give yourself a little bit more of a cushion as well to play his rushing and receiving line. We can touch on that in depth on the next stream. But I love the Brian Thomas Jr. and the Chuba Hubbard looks.
By the way, I'm 2-2 on this show on Kicker Props, so it is time to go over 500, and this is the only week this season that the Tennessee Titans will not be playing. You can already look ahead to next week to know what I'm going to pick on the show. Guys, another awesome show. Always, I mean, when Uncle Dave's giving stories about, hearing Coolio and Gangsta's Paradise before it became a hit, that's when you know the Prop Show has reached its peak. I absolutely love it. It's great being on with you guys. For the award-winning Dave Richard, and the best handicapper that I know, Propstarz, IMEC. And as I always like to say, let's hit it big. Good luck.